Celeste Monroe, a dignified black woman, walked into a courthouse expecting a routine day, but instead she faced humiliation at the hands of a corrupt deputy. Stripped of her dignity, she seemed defeated. But the moment she revealed her true identity, the room froze. Power shifted, justice prevailed, and what began as an act of cruelty became a catalyst for change. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. Celeste Monroe stepped from her silver Buick into the quiet morning, feeling the familiar coolness of early Charleston air brush softly against her face. It was just after 8 o'clock, and the sun was rising gently, casting a golden hue over the courthouse steps. Celeste paused briefly, allowing herself a slow breath, taking in the soft rustle of Spanish moss hanging from the nearby oaks and the distant hum of traffic, a calming routine she'd come to treasure. She straightened her navy blue blazer, feeling the comforting texture of the fabric beneath her fingers. Her silver hair, carefully styled into neat, dignified coils, caught the morning sunlight, gleaming softly as she moved. Though she often wore the black judicial robe that marked her authority inside the courtroom, outside she preferred anonymity. Just another citizen going about her business, unnoticed yet quietly observant. Today, however, carried an unusual weight. Celeste felt an inexplicable tension hanging over her, subtle but unmistakable, like a gentle pressure building quietly in her chest. Shaking off the sensation, she lifted her chin and ascended the courthouse steps. Each click of her heels against the smooth stone echoed softly, resonating with purpose and quiet confidence. Approaching the security checkpoint, Celeste noted the stern figure of Deputy Hank Riker. He stood with arms crossed, face set in his typical rigid expression. Celeste had seen him many times. Stern, often abrasive, an authority figure firmly anchored in old-fashioned attitudes. Their eyes met briefly, and a flicker of suspicion passed through his gaze, subtle but clear. "Ma'am," Riker said, voice sharp as he stepped forward, blocking her path. "I need you to step aside for an additional check." Celeste hesitated, meeting his eyes evenly. "Is there an issue, officer?" she asked softly, her voice calm yet firm. "Just procedure," he replied curtly, his tone suggesting no room for debate. Celeste reached into her blazer, pulling out her federal credentials. The polished metal badge gleamed softly, catching the sunlight as she handed it to him. Riker barely glanced at it, slipping the badge casually into his pocket. "You'll get it back afterward," he said dismissively, motioning towards a side door. Celeste felt a quiet indignation rise within her, tempered by practiced patience. The small screening room was stark, windowless, with air that felt slightly colder, heavier. At its center stood a solitary metal chair beside a rolling cart cluttered with scanning equipment, and curiously, a pair of hair clippers. Her pulse quickened subtly, a rare feeling of unease tightening in her chest. "I don't consent to any invasive procedures," Celeste spoke clearly, her tone authoritative but measured. Riker stepped closer, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "You don't have a choice," he replied coldly. "Sit down." She felt the subtle threat in his words, a quiet challenge intended to erode dignity. Yet she remained standing, her expression steady, refusing to yield under his scrutiny. Riker moved the clippers toward her scalp, letting them touch her hair slowly, mockingly gentle at first before pressing harder. Celeste closed her eyes momentarily, bracing for what she knew was coming. The first strand of her hair fell silently onto her lap, then another and another. Each lock falling felt like a painful betrayal of dignity, dropping soundlessly onto the sterile tiled floor, accumulating like evidence of cruelty. Celeste forced herself to look up again, meeting Riker's gaze directly, refusing to show weakness or surrender. His eyes glittered coldly, enjoying the power he wielded momentarily. "This is what happens when you forget your place," he said sharply, voice laced with contempt. She didn't reply this time, focusing instead on the rhythmic hum of the clippers, the cold sting of metal against her scalp, the growing pile of her once carefully nurtured silver coils. Each passing second etched deeper resentment into her bones, steeling her resolve even further. Finally, Riker switched off the clippers abruptly, the sudden silence ringing louder than the harsh buzzing had moments earlier. He stood back, admiring his work cruelly. The corners of his mouth twisted in satisfaction. There, much better. Celeste remained silent, her breathing steadying slowly, pulse still rapid, but now fueled by purpose rather than fear. Her hands trembled faintly, fists clenched tight. She felt utterly exposed, deeply humiliated, but beneath it all burned an unshakable determination, fierce and unwavering. Riker stepped aside, gesturing mockingly toward the door. "You're free to go now," he said dismissively. She rose slowly, standing tall despite the profound degradation she felt. Her gaze was clear, piercing through him with silent defiance as she stepped forward, shoulders back, head held high. Because Celeste knew one truth Riker did not yet grasp. This humiliation was not the end. It was merely the beginning of something much larger than either of them imagined. Celeste adjusted the collar of her blazer one last time before pushing open the tall, heavy courtroom doors. The sound of the hinges groaned faintly, announcing her presence before she even stepped inside. She didn't rush. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, each step measured and unyielding. The hum of low conversation faded instantly as every head turned in her direction. The air seemed to still. Rows of lawyers, clerks, and onlookers sat frozen, eyes following her as though they couldn't quite place what they were seeing. A black woman, head shorn unevenly, walking into a federal courtroom with a posture so erect, so composed, it demanded attention. Whispers died mid-sentence. Pens hovered above notepads. Someone near the back audibly swallowed, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Celeste let her gaze sweep across the room, not challengingly, not pleadingly, just enough to meet the eyes of those who had smirked, those who had looked away, and those who had done nothing. She saw the recognition dawn slowly, rippling like a wave. Some shifted uneasily in their seats. Others stared, wide-eyed. Even a few guards near the exits glanced at each other, unsure how to respond. Her focus, however, zeroed in on one figure. Riker. He stood near the side door, where he'd stationed himself, arms crossed. But now his stance was stiff, his face pale, his eyes locked onto hers for a fleeting second before darting away, as if meeting her gaze might undo him completely. His lips parted slightly, then closed, as if trying to form words but finding none that fit the moment. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his expression hollow, stunned, like a man who'd realized far too late the depth of his mistake. Celeste didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply walked past him, letting the weight of her presence do the work. She approached the bench, where her judicial robe lay neatly folded over the chair, the same chair she had occupied countless times before. For a brief moment, she stood motionless, letting her eyes fall on the black fabric. Then slowly she lifted the robe. The heavy material draped over her arms as she unfolded it, the gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial. As she slipped it on, one sleeve at a time, the shift in the room's energy was palpable. Every eye stayed glued to her, the tension thick enough to taste. Celeste didn't rush the process. The weight of the robe settled on her shoulders like armor. It wasn't just clothing. It was a statement. She was reclaiming the power that had been so carelessly dismissed earlier that morning. Her movements were calm, steady, but inside she could feel the anger burning away, replaced by a steady, steely resolve. With the robe secure, she turned slowly to face the courtroom. No one spoke. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint creak of someone shifting in their seat. She looked out at the attorneys, the clerks, the audience. Her expression was unreadable, calm yet cold, a calm not born of peace but of precision. This was not a woman defeated. This was a judge, fully in control, fully aware of the magnitude of the moment. Riker, meanwhile, hadn't moved. His arms had dropped to his sides, his mouth slack. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards. His chest rose and fell with shallow, nervous breaths. His hands twitched slightly at his sides, fingers curling into fists before relaxing again. He didn't dare look directly at her, instead staring straight ahead at the empty space just above her head, as if pretending she wasn't there might somehow erase the consequences barreling toward him. Celeste finally spoke, her voice clear, steady, and commanding. This court is now in session. The simple statement was enough to shatter whatever illusions of control anyone else might have held. Riker flinched at the sound, his head jerking slightly. The clerks scrambled to prepare their notes. The attorneys hastily organized their files, fumbling slightly, as if suddenly aware they were in the presence of something much larger than a routine hearing. "Is the docket ready?" she asked the court clerk, her tone devoid of anger, but filled with quiet authority. The clerk's voice cracked slightly as she responded, "Yes, Your Honor." Celeste gave a single nod and settled into her chair. The leather creaked softly under her weight, the sound seeming to reverberate in the hushed courtroom. She leaned forward, her gaze finally landing squarely on Riker. His shoulders hunched, his breath caught audibly in his throat. For a moment she simply looked at him, not speaking, letting the silence stretch into something almost unbearable. When she finally spoke again, her words were measured and firm. "We will proceed as planned. No more, no less." Just enough to let the room know she was in control, that nothing about the morning's events had changed her course. If anything, it had only strengthened her resolve. She didn't need to raise her voice. The authority radiated from her presence alone. Riker shifted uncomfortably, his legs slightly bent, as if preparing to bolt. But there was nowhere to go. The realization of his actions, what they meant, who he had crossed, settled heavily on his shoulders. His complexion, already pale, seemed almost gray now. He looked every bit the man who had played a dangerous game and lost. And just like that, the courtroom moved forward. Celeste continued, voice even, guiding the proceedings without missing a beat. The power dynamics had shifted irreversibly, and everyone in the room felt it. No one dared speak out of turn. The once confident smirks had disappeared. Even the most skeptical observers now sat straighter, their eyes fixed on the woman who had just shown them exactly what strength, dignity, and justice looked like. The balance of power had not only been restored, it had been redefined. Celeste's calm yet commanding presence left no doubt. She wasn't merely a participant in this courtroom. She was its foundation, and the justice she delivered would not waver. Celeste's voice rang out across the courtroom. "Deputy Riker, step forward." Each word was calm, deliberate, yet unyielding. The quiet force of her command filled the chamber, where the air hung thick with tension. All eyes turned to Riker. He hesitated, his once confident posture now faltering. His hands twitched slightly, his jaw clenched as if bracing for a blow. Slowly, he walked to the center of the room. His complexion was pale, almost gray. The same man who had dismissed her with arrogance now stood small and uncertain. Celeste sat upright, her black robe draping her figure like armor. Her gaze was steady, pinning Riker in place as he reached the open space before her. He glanced around briefly, searching for support that never came. His fingers curled at his sides, then relaxed again, betraying the nerves he couldn't conceal. Her voice broke the silence once more, even and sharp. "State your full name." Riker swallowed hard. "Hank Riker," he answered hoarsely. Celeste nodded, her expression unreadable. "And how long have you served in this courthouse?" 14 years, he replied, voice barely above a whisper. 14 year, Celeste repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "In that time, how many complaints were filed against you?" Riker shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure," he stammered. 12, she said firmly. 12 complaints, all dismissed, all ignored. 12 opportunities to address your behavior, and nothing was done. The gallery remained silent, yet the energy in the room shifted. The tension that had gripped everyone seemed to loosen. People sat a little straighter, as if sensing a long overdue reckoning. Celeste leaned forward slightly. Her voice softened, but her words carried a heavy weight. "You didn't know who I was. You assumed that because I looked a certain way, you could treat anyone, with impunity. You thought no one would hold you accountable." Riker didn't respond. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumping. The sweat on his forehead glistened under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. The once defiant deputy now seemed deflated, like a man who had finally grasped the consequences of his actions. Celeste straightened. Her voice grew even sharper. "But you were wrong. This court exists to uphold justice, not your personal prejudices. not your arrogance. Justice. Her words struck like a gavel. The people in the gallery exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from dismay to quiet satisfaction. Some nodded. Others allowed themselves a faint smile. The atmosphere changed subtly but unmistakably, from tense silence to an almost palpable sense of relief. It wasn't celebration. It was recognition. A wrong was being righted. Riker shifted again, as if to speak, but no words came. He seemed frozen, the weight of the moment pinning him in place. His pale face reflected the collapse of his presumed authority. Celeste allowed the silence to linger just long enough. "This is not about revenge," she said finally. "It's about responsibility. Your actions have consequences, and today you will face them." With that, Celeste gestured toward the court officers. The gallery's whispers returned, soft but charged with a sense of justice restored. Riker's hands trembled as he was escorted out. The courtroom settled into a new, steadier rhythm. What had once felt like a space of silent complicity now carried a new energy, a place where justice could no longer be ignored. Celeste sat alone in her chambers, the courthouse unusually quiet after the day's events. She could see her reflection in the glass panel above her desk, her scalp unevenly shaved, the scars of the morning still visible. Yet for the first time, she saw something beyond the surface, a strength she hadn't fully recognized before. The weight of her robe rested on the back of her chair, no longer needed at that moment. She closed her eyes and thought of the people who had watched her take the bench, their faces shifting from doubt to trust, from silence to respect. This wasn't just about her. It was about every individual who had ever walked into a courthouse and felt the sting of prejudice, the chill of injustice. Her decision to stand firm had sparked something larger than herself. The whispers she had heard in the gallery were not just whispers of surprise, they were whispers of hope. People left the courtroom that day believing that change, while slow, was possible. When she finally rose from her seat, she didn't reach for a hat or scarf. Instead, she opened her chamber door and walked out, her head bare, her expression calm. She descended the courthouse steps into the late afternoon light, feeling the sun on her skin. Passers-by glanced at her with curiosity, but she met their gazes with quiet confidence. Her stride was steady, her shoulders square. She carried with her not just the weight of the day, but the resolve that she had done what was right. As the wind lifted slightly, brushing against her exposed scalp, Celeste felt no shame, only pride. She had reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, she had shown others how to reclaim theirs. In life, true strength lies not in avoiding adversity, but in rising above it with dignity. Celeste's story reminds us that every challenge we face can inspire change, not just for ourselves, but for those who follow. By choosing courage over fear and justice over silence, she has sparked waves of justice that ripple beyond the courtroom. As we reflect on her journey, let's commit to standing against injustice, supporting Black women who lead with resilience, and acknowledging the unraveled fates that shape a fairer, more compassionate society. Share her story and be part of the change. The story of Celeste Monroe is not just a courtroom drama. It is a powerful lesson in the values we once learned from our best teachers, our parents, and our nation's moral compass. It's a story that reminds us that courage in the face of injustice is not only admirable, it is necessary. Celeste, a seasoned federal judge and a dignified Black woman, walked into a courthouse expecting a routine day. Instead, she endured humiliation from a man who underestimated her worth. But rather than responding with rage or retreat, she responded with grace, law, and the full weight of justice. This story brings to life what many educators, philosophers, and civic leaders have tried to instill for generations. Character is revealed not in comfort, but in crisis. From the writings of Maya Angelou to the speeches of Thurgood Marshall, we've been told that dignity must be held high, even when others seek to strip it away. Celeste's quiet strength and moral clarity transformed a moment of humiliation into a turning point for everyone watching, and, more importantly, for those who might have suffered in silence before her. She didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability. She didn't act for personal glory, but to restore faith in the very system she served. And in doing so, she not only reclaimed her voice, she gave voice to countless others whose stories have gone unheard. For older Americans, Celeste's story may feel familiar. We've seen injustice before. We've fought through it, and we've taught our children to do better. But stories like hers remind us that the fight is never over, and that we all have a role to play, whether in a courtroom, a classroom, or our community. Let Celeste Monroe's resilience be a call to remember the values that built us: integrity, justice, and the strength to speak when it's hardest. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, speak it, live it, because the next generation is watching, and what they need most is our example.